Coming up on Global Business, Chinese President Xi Jinping has spent the last few days inspecting Hebei province in northern China. Chinese Foreign Minister Qin Gang is visiting Norway. We bring you the latest. And the U.S. has postponed debt ceiling talks between President Joe Biden and the top congressional leaders to next week. Hello and welcome to this edition of Global Business on CGTN. I'm Guan Xing in Beijing. First up in the program, Chinese President Xi Jinping has spent the past few days inspecting Hebei province in northern China. During his tour, President Xi chaired a symposium on the further development of Beijing, Tianjin, and Hebei. He emphasized the importance of maintaining confidence, seizing opportunities, addressing challenges, and turning crises into advantages. He urged a more vigorous approach to work with a balance between development and security to continually advance the coordinated development of these regions. The goal is to make Beijing, Tianjin, and Hebei the leading and demonstrative regions of modernization with Chinese characteristics. China's free trade zones, which have been in operation for some time, have played a significant role in driving growth and facilitating foreign trade and investment. In the first quarter of this year, they continue to be a crucial factor in the steady development of these areas. Our Su Xianbo provides a detailed analysis.
According to the Ministry of Commerce, China's free trade zones, or FTZs, have seen significant growth in foreign trade and investment in the first 3 months of this year. The total foreign trade in the country's 21 FTZs have risen by 6.6% on a yearly basis, reaching 1.8 trillion yuan, or over $260 billion, which is 1.8 percentage points higher than the national level. Additionally, the actual use of foreign direct investment in these FTZs have increased by over 22% compared to the previous year, reaching nearly 72 billion yuan, which is 17.2 points higher than the national level. During a press conference, the spokesperson of the Ministry of Commerce, Shu Jueting, emphasized that pilot free trade zones have been strategically important in promoting reform and opening up in the new era.
Free trade zones have given full play to their advantages as pioneers and actively explored new ideas to stabilize foreign trade and foreign investment. It will foster new drivers of growth and contribute to steady development of foreign trade and foreign investment in China.
Shu added FTZs have long been making efforts in encouraging institutional innovation, increasing support for dominant industries, improving services, and unclogging logistics. Looking ahead, Shu said the ministry will organize various activities to help businesses at home and abroad to learn more about China's FTZs policies and share opportunities for future development. Su Xianbo, CGTN, Beijing.
To understand more about China's free trade zones and the country's technology innovation efforts, we are joined by John Gong, Vice President of Research and Strategy at the University of International Business and Economics, Israel. Well, thank you for your time, Professor Gong. So how do you evaluate the performance of China's FTZs, and do you anticipate their expansion in the future?
Well, China's free trade zone policy has been spectacularly successful. It's the hallmark success recipe of China's experience in explaining China's dramatic growth, particularly as related to the export sector. This model has created many jobs, has improved China's exports, and also attracted a lot of foreign investment in the past as well. The way of doing things in China, the Chinese way of doing things, is always, doing a pilot project, experiment with things, experiment with different policy initiatives to have a feeling, have a gauge of what is expected to come. And everything goes well, we broaden it to a much larger area, much larger market. And I think, in this case, the free trade zone, the new free trade zone policy would be done exactly the same way. I would say that, with the success of Hainan and other places, I think, this concept will be introduced into other provinces and cities as well.
And what are some of the key insights from China's current account surplus of $82 billion in the first quarter of 2023? And should China be cautious of any potential risks or capital outflows due to shifts in U.S. monetary policy?
Well, if you look at the trade figure, it's just every time people being bad-mouthing Chinese exports prospect ever since the beginning of the year. Actually, month after month, the export sector has been pleasantly surprising us. If you look at the first quarter trade surplus in goods, it's a spectacular number, $140 billion. And of course, it's swayed a little bit by China's surplus in service trade, as well as other capital inflow-outflow movements. But nevertheless, that's a very large amount of money. One would expect that the RMB would appreciate as a result of the strong performance in the export sector. But surprisingly, it hasn't actually. What it tells me, at least, I think, is that probably the market is still expecting the dollar to continue to be strong a little bit more for a few more months, expecting that the Fed probably hasn't finished its task of raising interest rates. I think the currency exchange market still needs a little bit of more accumulation before RMB starts to appreciate. I think that over the long run, with China's exports sector's performance, I'm betting that RMB will appreciate in later half of the year.
And last but not least, let's talk about President Xi's visit to Shijiazhuang recently. He emphasized the importance of technology innovation. What is the outlook for China's progress in building an innovation-driven economy, and how crucial is achieving technological self-sufficiency in this process?
Well, this is self-evidently very important because we are engaged in competition with the United States, with several technology choke points imposed on us by Jake Sullivan's National Security Council, a policy what he described as small yard, high fence. It's critically important for domestic companies to develop indigenous technologies. And this is what innovation is all about. I mean, at the end of the day, all historical grand competitions boils down to competition in technology, in science and technology. So this is one area that the country cannot afford to lag behind. So I think it's critically important to develop these technologies, precisely as President Xi repeatedly has emphasized throughout his visits. Inspection visits, and numerous occasions he has been talking about this. So obviously this is going to be very important.
Well, thank you for your analysis, Professor John Gong. Please stay with us for more discussions later in the program. And now we're heading for a short break. Still to come on the program. Chinese Foreign Minister Qin Gang is visiting Norway. He will bring you the latest.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
China's trade with the European Union continued to grow in the first 4 months of the year, despite weakening global demand. Trade between the two sides topped 1.8 trillion yuan, or $260 billion from January to April. That was up over 4% in yuan terms, while trade with other major partners, such as the US and Japan, have dropped. Last year, cross-border investment between China and Europe continued to increase both ways, driven by certain sectors. For example, China's auto industry continued to be a strong magnet for European investors, while Chinese investors were eyeing the new energy, infrastructure, and machinery sectors in Europe. Salmon exports from Norway to China are expected to see a steady increase thanks to the rising middle-income population in China. Our correspondent Johannes Plutcherberg reports from Oslo, Norway.
For Norwegians, fishing is more than just an income. It is part of their identity.
Fresh salmon out today. The salmon gives us the possibility of having work and industry along the long coastline. And you know, there's people living on a lot of islands in the very deep fjords, and this is the key industry.
Camilla Bredesen runs the Salmon Visitor Center in Oslo, where tourists can learn about and taste Norway's most exported fish.
There is 100 ways to prepare salmon. You can do it raw, you can just cut it to sashimi and eat it, and you can do it the more traditional way, which is of course the smoked.
Norwegian seafood exports to China hit a new record high in the first quarter of this year. Over 40,000 tons of salmon, cod and other seafood were shipped in April, an increase of 18% year-on-year, making Beijing the third largest market for Norway's fish. This comes as demand for such products has seen a bounce back in line with China's reopening after the pandemic.
Yes, it is very prestigious in China. We thought it's high quality and it's more expensive than the salmon from other countries.
China is one of the most exciting growth markets for Norwegian seafood. Today, it's approximately 5% of the value of Norwegian seafood, but the potential is really there with such a large population.
The Council says Norway's fish stocks have remained broadly stable in recent years, but it needs to find better ways of eradicating a problem that specifically affects salmon lice, before the industry can expand further. Currently, salmon lice are removed mechanically, but a significant number die during that process.
Handling will destroy the mucus on the fish, it will destroy some of the skin, and you get sores and wounds on the fish. So we need to find a way how to separate the fish from the open seawater in order to control the salmon lice situation.
Despite these ongoing issues, regulators say there is no health risk for people eating the salmon.
The Norwegian Food Safety Authority controls the whole food chain, from the fish farm and to the export to China. And in that lays that the fish is safe to eat.
For now, carp remains the most popular fish in China, but due to a growth in the country's middle class, the more expensive salmon is gaining popularity, and that's set to create more demand. A demand that Norway's fishing industry will hope to satisfy. Jonas Blechberger, CGTN, Oslo.
Chinese Foreign Minister Qin Gang is currently on a visit to Norway. He met with representatives from the business community in Oslo prior to his meeting with Norway's Prime Minister. Our Johannes Blechberg reports from Oslo.
This visit comes just a few months after the Norwegian Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre has called for closer ties between Norway and China. He says that the world needs China to meet global challenges, and this was also emphasized by the Norwegian Foreign Minister Anniken Huitfeldt, who said she really appreciated how well China and Norway worked together in the UN Security Council in the past years, especially by calming the ongoing conflict in Gaza. Now, there still are disagreements between the two nations, especially concerning human rights issues. The Norwegian foreign minister has criticized or has urged her concerns about human rights issues in certain parts of China, while Qin Gang has said that China is relentlessly working and putting an effort to improve human rights in China and all over the world. And another main topic of this bilateral visit was green cooperation, and both countries said that they are improving the bilateral work, the bilateral business in regards with green mobility, green energy and green technology. And one last thing that they mentioned today was that travel from Norway to China will be improved by update of the visa policy.
And now for more discussions on the visit and the ties between China and Europe, let's bring back John Gong, Vice President of Research and Strategy at UIB Israel. Thank you for staying with us, Professor Gong. So can you share your thoughts on Chinese Foreign Minister Qin Gang's visit to Europe and how it may affect the relationship between the two regions?
Well, there's a lot of voices of criticism against China over the last few months, ever since the war started in Ukraine. And I think Norway is probably one of the few exceptions where the country has maintained a very friendly stance towards China. And I think what the Prime Minister as well as the Foreign Minister have said about China, in my view, is very much appreciated, as you have just reported. And I think our minister, Foreign Minister Qin Gang's response is also very much appreciated by the Norwegian side as well. I think the relationship between the two countries is built probably more than just on the commercial interests. Of course, we have a huge appetite for the very nice Norwegian salmon sashimi, the palatable salmon sashimi from Norway, but other goods as well. And also, China's exports to Norwegian is also steadily increasing, especially I think in the electric car sector. The Norwegian, the Scandinavian countries in general, have seen quite a bit of an increase in China's electric car sales there. And I think on top of this, more importantly, I think is the common interest in the political arena. I don't think we have any sort of fundamental interests in conflict, and we all have shared an interest in a whole range of issues, particularly on the climate agenda, on cooperation in green technologies, and also on peace as well, especially peace in Ukraine. So I think from all these perspectives, I think the two countries' relationship is on solid footing at this point.
And what is your perspective on the de-risking approach by some European countries and how it might impact economic ties between the two sides?
Well, this theory comes from Washington. European Union Commissioner von der Leyen came to China. She was talking about these things. But I think in the end of the day, it's actually very difficult to draw a very clear line between de-risking and decoupling. Even though their side was talking about no decoupling, but I think what's happening in the business sector, in the business community, really runs the risk of further decoupling, even though they claim it's de-risking. I mean, this whole idea about de-risking is built on geopolitics and also to some extent ideology as well. Now, free trade is not supposed to be hinged upon these things. Never in recent history, that the developed world has been placing so much emphasis on these so-called national security concerns. They're not supposed to be happening like that. And at the WTO, there's no such thing. As related to this kind of a narrow, such a broad interpretation of national security. In any of the provisions and clauses in WTO, Article 21 of the GATT agreement has a very narrow interpretation of national security. So I think this whole idea of de-risking is way overbloated in my view. I don't think there is any potential of conflict between Europe and China. And if that's the case, what's to worry about so-called risk here?
Indeed, it's so difficult to establish a relationship of trust with a certain level of suspicion of the other side. So in terms of managing differences and expanding mutually beneficial cooperation, what steps can be taken?
I think from China's perspective, I think what we can do is mostly in the commercial area, in terms of, for example, trying to resurrect that bilateral investment agreement, further free trade agreements with other European countries, and also on the commercial side, I think it's the further investment in both directions that serves as the ballast of the China-European political relations and foreign relations.
Well, thank you very much for your insights. And that was John Gong, Vice President of Research and Strategy at UIB Israel for us. And now we're heading for a short break. Still to come on the program. The United States has postponed debt ceiling talks between President Joe Biden and top congressional leaders to next week.
360-degree profiles of industry movers and shakers, tech mavericks, and policymakers. We drill down on their success. We ask how they set strategy and how they navigate in an increasingly competitive market. Real talk, real business. Join the conversation. Biz Talk, only on CGTN.
Moving on to the European economy, the UK economy realized a mild growth of 0.1% in the first 3 months of the year, matching market forecasts. Though expectations were of long recession, the steep plunge of 0.3% in March showed that economic recovery still remained fragile. Economists from the Office for National Statistics said the recovery trend in March was mainly stalled by widespread decreases across the services sector and poor performance of warehousing, distribution, and retail. Meanwhile, high inflation continued to linger in Spain and France in April. National Statistics Institute data showed the final reading of Spanish national consumer prices rose 4.1% in the 12 months through April. That's an increase from 3.3% in the period through March and confirmed the previous official flash estimate. There was also no changes to the initial readings of France's inflation rate, seeing increasing to 0.6% on a monthly basis last month, matching the market consensus. Inflation in the Eurozone reached an all-time high of 10.6% late last year before declining to 8.5% in January. Most EU states have responded with tax cuts and subsidies to soften some of its worst effects. And CGTN spoke to Jove Toker, a professor at American Graduate School in Paris, to find out the reasons for the high inflation in Europe.
First one, of course, chronologically speaking, is the COVID-19 2-3 years of great perturbations in world economies and European economies. The second one is the war in Ukraine, obviously in Europe. Those two are the major ones. Then you add to these two the logistics aspect, which with different proportions has hurt other sectors of the economy, and including the ones which were ready to restart full recovery after COVID, and which are ready to face the repercussions of the Russian-Ukrainian war. They all suffered logistical problems which have brought prices up. And then the fourth reason is rather more individual regarding different European countries in terms of the quality and the problems in the governance of specific countries. So you compare Germany to Britain, to Italy, to France, and you find different reasons which are part of the political scene within those countries. The overall relative weakness of the unions all across the continent. Once again, I mean, the situation is not equivalent in Scandinavia and in Mediterranean Europe, but in a comparison to previous periods, the altogether impact of unions in the overall equilibrium of national economies is weaker today than, say, 5, 10 or 15 years ago. So the negotiating power, of course, is weaker, and therefore you find less pressure on the measures which are those which fight inflation.
In the meantime, German Finance Minister Christian Lindner has urged the U.S. to come up with a grown-up decision on the federal debt ceiling. Speaking on the sideline of the G7 summit in Japan, Lindner warned about the potential risks to the global economy if the U.S. failed to do so. Lindner elaborated later that a grown-up decision means to reach an acceptable result which was not dictated by party political considerations or short-term motives. A debt ceiling meeting between U.S. President Joe Biden and top congressional leaders has been delayed until next week. Tuesday's meetings on the debt ceiling ended with no solution, with the nation hurtling towards a June 1st deadline to reach a deal or risk default. There are apprehensions that the country may end up defaulting on its debt obligations. The International Monetary Fund warned that if the U.S. defaults on its debt, it could bring serious consequences for the global economy. IMF also urged the parties in the U.S. to come together to reach a consensus to urgently address this matter. And CGTN's Washington, D.C. bureau earlier talked to a senior correspondent of Business Insider about what makes people most concerned about the development of AI.
Nothing like this we've ever seen in our lives. It took years between variations of the iPhone to come out, and every couple of weeks it seems like there's a new version of ChatGPT. So this is all happened so quickly, and you have people at opposite ends, Warren Buffett, Elon Musk at the other, such different backgrounds, but they both have come out publicly very concerned about AI.
You know, I never thought I'd say this, but Elon Musk and Warren Buffett in the same sentence, and that makes me worried that they're worried, if that makes any sense at all. What is the worst case scenario that they are so concerned about?
In the immediate term, they're concerned about deep fakes, that it will become very hard to tell what's real and what's not on the internet, which is already a big problem. AI makes it much worse. There's also the displacement of workers. But then in terms of worst case scenario, it's that AI is the stuff of science fiction movies, that it could become sentient and evil and take over the human race. You know, if you can teach AI to code and to teach itself, then it just becomes progressively more advanced, and there's nothing to stop it.
When you mean something to stop it, I'm thinking of, you know, sci-fi movies where, you know, the hero goes and pulls the plug on the robot because it got too strong and it got too smart. And I'm not joking about this, but do humans have the ability to stop something that's learning on its own?
Well, you know, hypothetically, there is not a limit. But I mean, we are getting, you know, far ahead of ourselves, and no one knows exactly what this looks like, which is why people like Elon Musk are just calling for a temporary pause on development. But the problem is that, you know, even if the government were to step in, you know, this is an international thing. It's happening everywhere. I met a founder who's developing a ChatGPT that you can look up anything on. You can look up, you know, how to build a bomb, how to make meth, things that the normal ChatGPT restrict you. So even if government wants to step in, it's very hard to stop technology.
And that would do it for this edition of Global Business here on CGTN. Thank you for being with us. The Point with Liu Xing is coming up next. Stay tuned.